Hi everyone. For our first video lecture of the year, we are going to continue looking at influences on the colonists for that Declaration of Independence and to break free and start their own nation. Now, we watched our crash course video that looked at some of those key irritants on the road to revolution, and we started looking at some of those philosophical roots. And I want to continue to examine how English philosophers really influenced the colonists' thinking when it came to declaring independence and drafting that declaration. The key Enlightenment English philosopher that I want to focus on is John Locke. John Locke was alive in the 17th century, and he wrote an influential book with his philosophies on the purpose of government and the Second Treatise of Government. His work will be widely read by our colonists here in America, and his thinking will be evident in our drafting of the Declaration of Independence. The first idea that he really puts forth and focuses on is this idea of natural rights, that we have rights that are inherent in humans that are not dependent on government. And some of those rights, as he mentioned, be life, liberty, property. Think about how that parallels what Thomas Jefferson talks about in the Declaration of Independence. And he emphasizes that the purpose of government is to protect those rights. And that is the number one job. So these natural rights inherent in humans, not dependent on government, not given, should not be taken away. Government exists with the sole purpose to ensure that our natural rights are preserved and protected. From there, he goes on to talk about the idea of consent of the governed, that government has power because the people have consented to be governed by it. And he talks about the idea of the social contract. Social contract theory is this idea that we lived at one time, as Jacques Rousseau had mentioned, in the state of nature. And it was chaos, you were looking over your shoulder. People didn't like living that way. There was no safety, there was no security, there was no order. Those natural rights were threatened, and people didn't like that. So people were willing to give up some of those rights to make sure that their natural rights were preserved. They were okay giving up some other freedoms to make sure that their natural rights would be preserved. So in exchange, people give up some of their freedoms to the government to have those natural rights protected. That is the number one purpose of government, protect those natural rights. And if the government is not doing their job, Locke would argue that people have the right to change their government and start fresh. And you can imagine why the colonists would latch on to that piece specifically of John Locke's writing. So he is incredibly influential in getting the colonists to think about how they are going to frame their argument, their justification for revolution. And we'll see when Thomas Jefferson, who is the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, starts drafting that, he's really going to heavily borrow from John Locke in his writings. There were other English philosophers that would influence the thought of the colonists as well, especially in starting to think about what type of government they want, what kinds of ideals they want embodied in their government. Again, ideas of consent of the governed, that people give their consent to be governed by that higher authority and power, that government power is limited. So where you're coming from a monarchy where the king has absolute power, they say no. Government power is limited by natural rights, and that the governed restrict the power that the government has. Thomas Hobbes is another English philosopher. Baron de Montesquieu was a French Enlightenment thinker who came up with ideas of separation of powers, three branches of government, ideas that we will see reflected in our own Constitution later on. So, in being widely read in these writings, these works, these philosophies of French and English political thinkers, the Declaration of Independence is drafted. The Declaration of Independence is both a moral and legal justification for rebellion. It will be written for Britain and the rest of the world as this justification why revolution is necessary, why they are taking such an extreme step. And it was the hope of these men that the Declaration of Independence, being really written for the entire world, would also help rally some foreign assistance, especially from France, to try and pull off a successful revolution. If we look at the structure of the Declaration, we notice that there are kind of three essential parts. The first is a statement of natural rights. You'll notice that Thomas Jefferson is going to borrow very closely a lot of the philosophy of John Locke. We can draw a lot of close parallels. So where John Locke puts forth the idea of your natural rights being life, liberty, property, Thomas Jefferson will echo that with a slight change: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The natural rights are followed by a list of grievances, so a list of all the different ways that the king has abused the colonists, and then it ends with that firm and final Declaration of Independence. I want to note the signatures at the bottom of the Declaration, all the signers of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. At this time that they put their name to that page, they are traitors. They are committing treason against the crown. They know that. They understand the significance of that. If the colonies do not win the war for independence, these men are going to be seen as traitors and executed. They know that, and they will take that risk anyway. Now, we all know, spoiler alert, we win the war for independence. We become a free and independent nation. And in the words of King George and Hamilton, what comes next? We have our freedom, we have that independence, and now comes the hard part: governing. How are we going to govern? What will this government look like? Now, before we had our government created by the Constitution, we had a prior government called the Articles of Confederation. It fails for many reasons that we will discuss a bit more in class tomorrow. But I want to begin by showing you guys just some of the key features and starting to think a little bit about why this government couldn't be successful. The colonists, now being free and independent and having this opportunity to create this government, they don't want a repeat of what they left. They don't want a King George 2.0, a monarchy 2.0. They are distrustful of concentrated power. And so that's really reflected in this first attempt at governing. So, for lack of a better term, our national government under the Articles of Confederation had a very weak central government. There was no centralized higher power like we see in our federal government today. There was no executive. Why might they not have wanted an executive type figure in our government? Consider that. Legislature with one chamber, one vote per state. No courts. No ability for the national government to regulate commerce and trade. Taxation, revenue dependent on the states. To amend this government, unanimous consent, votes from every state. National defense, they could maintain an army and navy, and they had zero power over the state. So let's consider why this government might ultimately end up failing. Now, looking at some of the apparent weaknesses in that structure of government, there were some other problems that were arising at this time. The first was the colonies, these states, were undergoing major changes, a major power shift. And we saw that power was shifting from the hands of the wealthy to people with more moderate incomes, especially in the North. One reason for that: there was an increase in democracy, an increase in liberty. Now, after getting our independence, if you were a white male, you could vote. There was no more property requirement. That opened up an entirely new voting class, a massive expansion of suffrage, a new middle class majority with voting power, and the power of elites was threatened. Secondly, legislatures tended to have more power than the governor. State constitutions really rested power there because it was closer to the people. Again, a governor, that executive, we have distrust in that because of our experience with Britain and the king. And in fact, the legislature often selected the governor. So it's kind of just a puppet of the state legislature. So power shifts that kind of added a little bit of turmoil. We also had some economic issues after the war. There was a post-war depression. Many farmers were not able to pay their mortgages. Many middle-class politicians and state legislatures tried to help the debtors. Those who were in debt could not pay their mortgages, which did not make the economic elite happy. And this very issue actually led to Shays' Rebellion. So in Massachusetts, there was an exception. The economic elite were still in control, and they were closing down the farms of debtors. And Daniel Shays led a rebellion where they went to the courthouse, a big group of people, to prevent judges from issuing those foreclosures on farms. It was a rebellion. People were throwing blows at each other. And essentially, we realized that there was not a National Guard or an entity to help put down this unrest and rebellion. And they were afraid that this type of rebellion would spread throughout the colonies, throughout the states. So this moment was kind of the watershed moment where it was decided that this government's not working. We need to convene in Annapolis and try to revise the articles. And at the Annapolis Convention, delegates from 5 states were going to meet, and they decide that at Annapolis, because only 5 are present and you needed unanimous votes to change anything, it would be better to have a full-scale meeting in Philadelphia in 1787 to revise the articles. Okay, that is it for our video lecture. So please review your notes. If you had any questions from the lecture, please make sure that you have them written down somewhere and be prepared to ask them at the start of class tomorrow.